Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for another installment of Exploring Our World, where we here at Colonial Williamsburg take a deeper dive into the lives, minds, and experiences of individuals living in the 18th century. I'm Stacey Loveland, and joining me today is Robin Kipps, and we are going to be talking about cleanliness and disease in the 18th century. So to get us started, Robin, tell us how you came to be so knowledgeable on this subject.
We try. Thanks, Stacey. I'm the supervisor of the Pasteur and Galt Apothecary in Colonial Williamsburg, and I have a number of colleagues, and we love to sit down with 18th century medical books and 18th century medical dictionaries and study medicine. So it's one of our favorite things to do.
Excellent. And if you've been to visit us before, you may have actually visited the Pasteur and Galt Apothecary, on your own before. If you haven't been to visit us, though, or if you're just really missing it right now, well, this is your opportunity to ask all the questions you would ask there. If you have any curiosities, anything you want to ask Robin, type your questions out in the chat on the side of the video, and we'll answer as many of them as we can.
We sure will.
Live. But to get us started, I have a question, Robin.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you just give us a brief overview on 18th century medicine? I mean, what are we talking about when we're talking about medicine in the 18th century?
Because it's so different from modern medicine. So I always say one of the easiest things to do is right now, take everything in your head about modern medicine, bacteria, viruses, parasites, genetics, set it aside, all right? And then if anybody remembers the old theory of humors, which if you haven't, it was a concept that goes back to ancient times, that your body was made with 4 fluids and you're sick because your fluids are out of balance, set that aside. Because there's research in the late 1600s that shake that up, and then science of the Enlightenment push it to the background. So in this modern era, the 18th century, you've got this new paradigm going on, and we kind of explain your body in terms of a machine. Physics is one of our big sciences right now. So your blood's moving through your body, your heart's the pump, and if your body feels warm, maybe it's because your heart's pumping the blood too fast, it's moving, and it's building friction and heat. So observation, logic, and it makes perfect sense to us, 18th century. Chemistry is an emerging science. We're not explaining chemical imbalances in the body, but the research from chemistry is being directed into pharmacy. So we see evidence there. And then one last thing that sort of helps is that we're really empirical. So say you fall off your horse, all right, you have a broken leg, and we're not sure. So without lab tests, without x-ray machines, because we have very little equipment, 18th century, we're going to be using our senses, and we're going to be talking to you. So we're going to ask you if you, what's the nature of the accident? You know, how far did you fall? We're going to feel the bones. We're going to ask you if you heard anything break. Absolute last resort, and you pray your 18th century doctor never had to do this to you, but we're going to move the bones to see if they sound broken. Yikes. So it's a real empirical situation going on. And then using logic, we're going to put all this together, and we're going to come up with theories and best practices. And 18th century, we love to compare ourselves to ancient medicine and say, hey, look how much we have progressed. Awesome. So that's where we are.
I can really see how that is the middle ground between the much older school of medicine and that more modern germ theory and all the modern knowledge we're about to come into.
Right.
But while we're in that middle ground, well, we know it's not the humors causing illness, but we're not quite yet to germs.
Right.
What are we referring to in the 18th century when we hear people talking about things that make them sick? What's their theory?
Their vocabulary?
Illness? Yes.
Right. So if you're an 18th century person, you would be using the word contagion.
Okay.
And it's always fun. Let the 18th century speak for itself. So this is a definition from a dictionary published 1785 in London. It's a medical dictionary. So talking about contagious diseases, they talk about the communicating or transferring a disease from one body to another by certain steams of effluvia transmitted from the body of a sick person. Some diseases are thus propagated by an immediate contact or touch, such as the madness of a dog, think rabies. Sometimes a distemper is conveyed by infected clothes, as the itch, think scabies. And there's even cases where the air is said to be contagious, full of contagious particles. So it's a little different concept going on.
Awesome. So if we have our ideas about what's making people sick, obviously we want to prevent that in the 18th century. And since our program is talking about cleanliness today, can you tell us some of the ways people are trying to prevent and treat illness, especially through cleanliness?
Right. So back to your leg being broken, you also have some abrasions or cuts. So one of the best sources we've found from the 18th century talking about surgery is Lawrence Heister's textbook, A System of Surgery. It's published in London in the 1740s. It's kind of like the gold standard, and historians today have a lot of respect for it. So the takeaway from Heister is that dirt is offensive to the body. So in cleaning your wound, we're going to remove foreign particles. Fingers are all right. Right? So if there's any grass, grit in there, we're going to take it out. And then he recommends that you take a sponge, dip it in hot wine or hot brandy, wring it out, and wipe out the wound. And then the pharmacy books, so William Lewis's pharmacy book published in London, there's a 53 and a 68 version that we like to use, recommends a number of topical applications. And you're not going to like this one, but it will stop bleeding. That little bottle there in front of you, that's oil of turpentine, and it's going to sting, unfortunately. We're sorry. But it does actually stop bleeding. And then we can use some myrrh.
Oh, and we have myrrh, too.
So this is gum myrrh imported from the Middle East to Britain, to the colonies. It's going to be mixed up in a medicine and used topically as a wound dressing.
And so when it's mixed up, it looks more like this, right?
That's the real medicine that we made from the 18th century pharmacy books. And we always say that we have a lot of fun making these, but we always recommend to our friends, please go talk to your pharmacists. Not all of these meet current standards.
Well, that's fair. Although it does seem like at least some of them must work, right? I mean, how well do they work? In the 18th century, and thinking about things like myrrh, which have been around for thousands of years, right? That's the same myrrh from the Bible, isn't it?
Same myrrh from the Bible, same myrrh from Egyptian era when you're embalming bodies. So from a modern standpoint, it is antiseptic.
Okay.
And if anybody likes to read labels on the things at your house, some toothpastes and mouthwashes actually have myrrh in it. So yes, that would work. The turpentine by modern standards is actually feebly antiseptic.
Awesome. Wow. All right. Well, we have some guest questions coming in. John says that he would like to understand a little bit better about the professions of physician and surgeon. He says they're not necessarily cooperative with one another as far as he knows before the 1740s. So is this still the case? Is this what we're seeing in the mid-18th century, or physician and surgeon? Is there overlap? Can you define those terms a little more for us, perhaps, too?
Thank you, John,
people
for that.
Who know less than John.
That's the question. All right, there is professional rivalry in medicine, 18th century, and there's basically two career tracks going on. You've got university medical schools where physicians are going and attending with some of the brightest minds of the period. The authors of the textbooks are teaching, and they're getting degrees. They are writing their dissertations in Latin in some cases and defending them in Latin. And then you have surgeons who are traditionally apprenticing because they do not have degree programs for surgery yet. And so the surgeons are trying to get more respect. The MDs want respect. And so the two don't always see eye to eye on everything. But if you're an 18th century person, you need both of them.
Okay.
Right.
Awesome. Now, as ideal as it is to say everyone would be able to have access to a doctor, Leslie wants to know if that's actually the case. If someone is sick, are they universally going to be going to an office, or are they going to be able to be treated at home, especially for the different classes, the social classes in the 18th century? Can everyone go to an office, or can
so
they be treated at home?
accessibility is a big issue. Do you live close enough to a doctor? Because your professionals tend to be working in the larger cities, but a lot of people are not living in large cities at this point. So you actually have a couple options. In the original records for our site, we do see these two doctors making house calls. But in some cases, you're paying by the mile. So you have options. Your home medical books, some of them are written by physicians, some of them are written by lay people, so you get different levels of expertise. Your cookbooks have remedies. There's patent medicines that you can go and buy, and you can self-medicate at the time. So you have options at the time. Cost can be a consideration. And the really interesting thing we found is that the enslaved individuals are bringing over their own traditional treatments and practicing that here in the colonies. We can tell that from the archaeology, which our archaeologists have shared with us. So that's going on. Their owners are treating them, and then enslaved people are in the site records for our shop.
Awesome.
So options.
That's
right?
great to know. Alice submitted a question that goes along this same path that we're heading down. Alice is asking, who would have assisted at the hospital at the governor's palace during the Revolutionary War? And just for anyone who isn't aware, the governor's palace here in colonial Williamsburg served as a military hospital for soldiers who were wounded during the siege of Yorktown in 1781. So do we have any idea about people assisting at military hospitals? If you know anything specifically about the palace one, that would be good too.
That was good. So the Virginia Gazette, which is the newspaper published here in town in the 18th century, still published today, they are advertising for nurses to apply to help out. And so far in the Williamsburg records, we haven't seen any male nurses yet. So women are helping out as nurses. The surgeons actually would have young boys helping out as surgeons' mates. So if you are a nurse, one of your job descriptions might be to feed the soldiers. We know of a doctor recommending that nurses at the military hospitals in some other areas should take a bucket of warm water, a piece of soap, and a towel, take it around to each of your patients every day and make sure they have clean faces and clean hands. So sounds like fun.
And are there any things that the individual doctors, nurses, anyone else caring for patients are going to be doing at this time to protect themselves? Like you said, we know that there's concern about being in proximity to people who are ill in some cases. So are the doctors taking any other precautions for themselves?
Big question, and we've been looking for that. So far, we've seen William Buchan, who's an MD that writes sort of an international bestseller in the 18th century, and his book's called Domestic Medicine. But he recommends that people that take care of smallpox cases, whether you're professional or a layperson, you should wash your hands and clean your clothes because the contagion is on your clothes. You don't want to take it with you. Right.
Wow.
And then Moreau and a few others talk about how doctors should wash their hands and put on clean clothes before they go see new patients so they don't take the contagion with them. But the question is like, what's your suggested that you should do, what you actually do? There can be a disconnect.
There's no medical board checking in, is there?
Not yet.
Wendy has written in with another clarification about some of the things we're talking about. Wendy wants to know what the difference is between an apothecary and a doctor, because you work at an apothecary right now, you interpret the Pasteur and Galt apothecary, but we've also been talking about doctors. So what's the difference?
Hi, okay. So here's 18th century vocabulary. The word doctor is sort of a loose word. So if you go to medical school and get your degree, you're a physician and a doctor. If you apprentice to study pharmacy and medicine, you can be an apothecary, you are also called doctor. So the fun thing is if you're reading 18th century books and somebody's a doctor, we're sitting there going, all right, what type of doctor are we talking about?
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Now, I know that you have brought some things from the apothecary with you today. Is there anything on the table here that you would like to tell us about? I know there's one thing Howard has asked about, bleeding as a treatment. Do you have anything here that could tell us about
There's
bleeding
a little
to answer Howard's
lancet in
question?
there. Right. If you want to pick it up and
I
show him.
can.
So Howard, bloodletting is a treatment that's used. It's something that lay people are doing to each other. It's something that doctors are performing as a service. This is a reproduction tool that Stacy's showing. It's called the thumb lancet, and it's actually a copy of a piece in our collection. So one of the favorite place to use this would be center vein forearm. You put a bandage on, you're going to give your patient something to hold, and you're going to open that vein to remove blood as a treatment. And the interesting thing is that we're not using stainless steel yet, so you need to clean it so it doesn't rust. Rusty tools don't work.
So we are cleaning things, even if it's maybe not to wipe away the germs like we think of today.
Right.
Awesome. And why exactly are people being bled? We've heard about it as a treatment, but what are they hoping to achieve by bleeding you?
By bleeding, all right. So going back to the idea I was mentioning earlier, that in some cases if you have a fever, that your blood's circulating too fast and it's building friction and heat. One of the concepts is if you can take blood out, they're hoping that the blood won't circulate as fast and it would help with the fever. Or say your broken leg we were talking about, you get an area of inflammation. They explain the swelling and the heat and the redness as though the blood backs up in the blood vessels like an obstruction, and there's just too much of it in an area. So if you remove that blood, that should take care of the symptoms. So it's logical, doesn't always make works by modern standards.
Awesome. Well, and since we're talking about different ways that we're treating different things, you have another treatment on the table for something we mentioned earlier. We talk about a broken leg. Can you talk about this a little bit more?
So this is a reproduction piece that is based on Benjamin Bell's textbook. It's a 6-volume set on surgery, and we love to take our 18th century books to our trades people in our department and say, here, can you make this for us? And they're excellent. They're great. So this is a splint for a broken leg. And relating it back to cleanliness, one of our problems with compound fractures is where the bone slips through the skin and you have to slip it back under the skin and bandage. We're noticing 18th century that they tend to heal better if the patient is at home versus in a hospital.
Okay.
And of course, you would say cross-infection, right? We would say the air in the hospital smells bad, foul air. The air at your home smells good, it's sweet. It must be the bad air. So,
well, it's a start. Now, in the case of a compound fracture, that could require surgery, right? We have a couple questions coming in about surgery. I know Erin wants to know, how common is surgery going to be in cases like that? Could you have surgery right after a fall from a horse? Is that what we're performing? Are there sorts of surgeries that we're seeing to be very prevalent in the 18th century? Are there things we're not really seeing? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
What types of surgery we're doing and how often they're done?
And Leslie has also asked a question going with it too about who's doing the surgeries. Specifically, were there any female surgeons or physicians at all? So if you could answer both of those, that would be awesome.
Okay. So here's our problem is that a lot of times in the original records, they don't specify type of surgery. So we actually have some original records for our site. And my colleague Sharon has been going through. And every now and then, there's a comment. So she recently found a comment where a patient actually had to have both legs amputated. And we're going, oh my gosh, that must have been an incredibly horrible accident. Most of the time, they don't list the types of surgery. But what we can do is going back in the surgical books, we can tell you the types of surgery done. In general, we think bloodletting, which is considered surgery, is probably one of the most often performed surgeries. Pulling teeth would be a most often performed surgery. There's others which we can do, but we rarely would do, and we rarely ever open up the abdominal cavity. I mean, there's some exceptions. So, but as far as statistics, we're not required to keep statistics 18th century, and it makes it hard today to. But it's a good question. Women in professional care. So the first professional American woman to get her MD degree is going to be 19th century, all right? So this is a different world. So you can be really smart, dedicated, but in the colonies, in Britain, we don't see any women practicing. We have seen, I think there's 2 women in Italy that get their MD degrees. And one of them is friends of the Pope. And we said, hey, that's pretty cool.
That's really neat.
Networking is good.
Because we've been, coming back to the topic of cleanliness so much, Vinny has asked if you could just briefly describe personal hygiene in 18th century Williamsburg. So we've kind of hinted at hygiene as being a way to avoid contagion, as a way to help deal with contagion. What is that looking like on a daily basis for people? And also once you're in that hospital? I know you've mentioned
Yeah.
in a medical environment, washing things periodically. What does that look like there too?
So unfortunately, people are not keeping diaries. And we'd sit here and say, keep a diary. There's a historian 200 years ago that's going to die to know how often you brush your teeth. We don't know how often people brush teeth 18th century. What we can tell you is what the textbooks recommend. So one of my favorite references is William Buchan, again, in his textbook, mentions that if you have water, there is no excuse for being dirty. So he, from his perspective, says that poor people have an aversion to cleanliness, which I question, because I'm thinking if I was enslaved and I was working hard all day and I get back to my bed, it's like, am I going to go out to the well and drag in a couple buckets of water that weigh 8.3 pounds per gallon, fill up a tub, and take a bath every day? I'd much rather sponge, eat, and sleep.
Yeah, that definitely sounds preferable.
So a lot of it we think is going to depend on, if you're an enslaved person, are you living at a house? Are you living out in the field? What's your job? Are you have access to water? There's a lot of variables going on. And we think even today there's a lot of variables. So we're going to keep looking for answers. Thank you.
This is another question that we might not have as much documentation on, but John has asked about folk medicine. So if not everyone is able, to live in a more urban area where they can get to a doctor, where they can go to an apothecary, how common is folk medicine among the common poor? Are we seeing things that aren't necessarily cutting-edge medical science appearing in treatents in the 18th century?
There is. That's a great question. And when I run across it, I try to save the reference, and I haven't had a whole lot of chance to run across a whole lot yet. But there's some interesting cases of sailors putting on amulets on themselves to prevent disease. And they actually will say, I don't want to go to a doctor. I want to go back to the country where I got this disease and be treated by the people there. There's superstition going on. There's cases where if somebody is born with what today we'd call a birth defect, there's 18th century beliefs among some people that, well, hey, mom, when she was pregnant, saw something that upset her. Therefore, that's why the baby is born with the condition that they have. So that's going on simultaneously, and it's a lot harder to find, but it's really cool when you run across it.
Awesome, thank you. And I know we just put up a link for a blog post that was done about plant remedies in the 18th century. So that link has been posted in the chat. You can view that too to get even more information about some other remedies being used at this time period. But you mentioned talking about different people using other cures. Mm-hmm. You mentioned people on boats. You mentioned sailors using amulets, and Samuel has asked about what people on ships are going to be doing for medicine. What medicines would a ship's surgeon have on board, say, a 1770s vessel for basic everyday use? It's kind of a different situation after all, since you're very contained.
Right. So there are actually medical kits. If you're on board a British ship, the British Navy is actually getting medical kits, chests of medicines from the Society of Apothecaries. And there's a little friction in there sometimes about what they think you need and what the sailors think they need. But there's actually kits in there. And it's going to depend on where you're going, whether you're going to warm climates like the Caribbean, where there's going to be problems with malaria, or you're going to go on a campaign someplace else. But that's pretty much up to the surgeon to decide at that time. And you, as a private individual, you can actually buy home medical kits yourself, and they come with directions. So when our shop is eventually open after the pandemic, we actually have a reproduction home medical kit. You got to come visit.
Yes. And until they can come visit, I know you actually recently wrote a post as well for our blog that has to do with some of the things you just mentioned. And we have just put the link to that post as well in the chat. So our listeners at home can have even more information from you, just to tide them over until they can come see you in person. So we have a couple more questions. I have one that I've just seen come across my screen from Barry that I'm particularly interested to know the answer to. Would doctors also treat animals, or were there people who specialized in veterinarian medicine?
Barry, all right. So veterinary science really isn't here yet, because our first American veterinary school is like mid-19th century. but there's a lot of do-it-yourself books, so you can take care of animals yourself. But that being said, both of the doctors, Drs. Pasteur and Galt, who worked here in Williamsburg, both owned plantations and had animals. And we think they might have been treating some of the animals themselves. So that's veterinary medicine's a whole nother area which we'd like to get into sometime. But I would say there are people, but it's not really a profession yet.
Awesome. John asks, since earlier we were talking about teeth, is dentistry a separate profession in the mid-18th century, or is it performed by surgeons? So, we're looking at all the different groups.
So technically, dentistry is still part of surgery. It hasn't become its own profession yet, but you do see a few people advertising as surgeon dentists. And there is a person in town by the name of Baker, who is here in town. He's advertising, he's going to do fillings. You have a choice of lead and gold. He can extract teeth. He can make dentures. And he's also advertising that he can do tooth transplants. The first time we ever saw that, we were going, what's this all about? But William Hunter, who's a surgeon in England in the 18th century, actually publishes a textbook on dentistry in the 1770s. He's got all the directions on how to do it.
Wow.
So it's for real surgery. It's happening.
Awesome.
Success is another issue, but go ahead.
They're trying it, though. That's pretty cool.
We're trying it.
Lori is asking about another branch of the medical field. Lori wants to know if there were specific people who examined eyes and prescribed glasses as our modern optometrists, or are doctors also serving this purpose? Are glasses being based on individual prescriptions, or is it kind of a one-size-fits-all thing?
Well, we think that's probably another issue depending on where you are. Like in Williamsburg, we don't have evidence of anybody specializing in eye care. But one of the stores in town actually advertised eyeglasses for sale. But if you can get to London, there's a guild of spectacle makers. There's still a society of it, and they are right next door to the Society of Apothecaries downtown London. And there's actually some 18th century directions for making custom lenses for people, and having you stand in front of something, we don't know what they're saying, but reading something and deciding based on how far you are from what you see to make custom lenses. So there are people that are specializing, and just we don't have any here.
Awesome. Well, since we've talked about so many different branches of the medical field and different people who are doing this in the 18th century, Charlie has a question, and Charlie wants to know, how does one become an apothecary apprentice?
How to become an apothecary
apprentice? How do you get into any of this?
All right, so first thing you've got to remember, this is not an equal opportunity society, all right? So if you're a young gentleman and you are, what's the term, scholarly, there's 18th century books written for parents to help children make career choices. And they're saying if they're going into medicine, make sure they're scholarly. You're going to need some Latin because some of your textbooks are written. You're going to need a good memory. It's going to be on-the-job training. So it's going to be botany. It's going to be a little bit of chemistry. It's going to be theory. It's bedside manner, learning how to diagnose diseases, how to keep your own books. At the time, so it's an apprenticeship. And then what you hope your parents can afford for you is to send you to one of the hospitals in England to study. So like both Galt and Pasteur here in Williamsburg studied at St. Thomas's Hospital in London, which was pretty well renowned 18th century. And you're going to be seeing an incredible number of surgeries that you'd never see in a small town like this, as well as doing dissections at that point. So that would be kind of like state-of-the-art best. First American pharmacy school in the U.S. is Philadelphia, and they are celebrating their 200th birthday next year.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah.
Also a little more recent than I was expecting. That's cool. We have yet another branch of the medical profession that we're getting questions about. Carol is wondering if you could discuss midwifery at this point in our history, and if you have any relevant stories to Williamsburg specifically. And Brian and Linda have submitted questions asking about what midwives are traditionally carrying with them, if they have kind of a kit and standard things that they travel with to help deliver children.
Okay, so the easy question first. I ran across directions for putting which you put in a kit. And if you want, we'll post that. It's an 18th century document, so we'll give you a quote. That's a cool question. So midwifery in Williamsburg is interesting because you have a number of male doctors practicing, and they're not calling themselves obstetricians, they're calling themselves man midwives. So Peter Hay, when he dies in 1766, his obituary mentions that he had practiced for many years with success as a man midwife. So for our time, it's a little closer to what we tend to interpret in the shop. In the 1770s, John Galt, when he finished his studies in London at St. Thomas's, also studied midwifery, and we have a copy of his certificate. So he is also practicing as a man midwife. So if you're expecting, you actually have a choice. You're in proximity to both. You can have a man midwife deliver your baby, or you can have a midwife. And Mary Rose, there's very little information that's survived about her, but she does advertise in the Williamsburg, the Virginia Gazette newspaper, and says that she had studied with both Dr. Galt and Dr. Pasteur, and she was now ready to serve ladies and others, is how it's written, 18th century. And we're thinking maybe she's talking about enslaved individuals. We know that some of the plantations had enslaved women that were also providing midwifery care for fellow enslaved individuals as well. So it's a real cool topic.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Vinny has asked a question that I'm super glad was asked, so thanks, Vinny. Are there any resources that you can suggest, any book or reading material to describe hygiene in the 18th century? And I'll tack on any other books you want to recommend about some of the things you've mentioned here, beyond the blog posts and such that we're linking to, of course.
Okay. So I think if you couple things you can do. JSTOR, which you get on the internet, it's a compilation of professional articles, and you can search by topic. And so that's an option.
And that is JSTOR.
Thank
you're
you,
typing
Stacy.
that out.
Yeah, right. The other thing is, if you get a copy of William Buchan's book, Domestic Medicine. It has been republished. It's been reprinted. He has an entire chapter in there on cleanliness. And realize it's like one voice, but it's one of the easier books published in the 18th century to read. So I'd say try that.
Awesome. Thank you. We have a couple questions coming up about drugs in the 18th century.
My favorite topic.
Yes,
All
no,
right.
are affecting
Yes.
people. So Sue wants to know if anesthesia was commonly available in this century and what they're using for it and how effective it is. And then Teresa wants to know if anyone is abusing drugs like these or other drugs at the time.
All right, so one of my favorite things to do at work when I have time is to sit and read 18th century medical dictionaries, because the books weren't written for us, they were written for 18th century students. The word anesthesia is actually in your 18th century books, and one of the earliest times you see it is 1724, but the definition is a medical condition where a patient has lost the sense of touch. It's not talking about a product that you would use to give a patient before surgery. So that's all coming later in the 19th century. So there are in the chemistry books directions for making ether, but it's something that it is flammable. It's not easy to make. And as an 18th century surgeon, that's not on your radar. It's not an option for you to use yet. That's going to be 19th century.
Awesome. So is anyone going to be, abusing any drugs that are prevalent in the 18th century? I mean, I don't know if there's myrrh abuse, but...
You're thinking opium abuse,
yes,
right?
How about that?
Okay, so the 18th century, the social constraints are different. It's a little different paradigm going on. The opium, a lot of it's being imported from the Middle East, Persia, as we would say, Iran today. Thebaic opium would be coming in out of Egypt. It's being shipped to England, England shipping it to our colonies. It's not cheap. We've heard it's not particularly tasty. I can't tell you myself. But and there's problems with it, because even 18th century, we can tell you that, you can itch. There's all kinds of side effects with it if you're not using it yet. So tracing addiction problems for our time period is not easy. But in general, what historians say is that when you finally have morphine early in the 1800s, and then you have hypodermic needles in the 1840s. You've got a concentrated form, you've got quick delivery, and the whole situation escalates. So
that's where it really
that's
starts to become a
that's
problem.
where it's going to be a big problem, right?
Great, that's good to know. We have a couple more questions about the efficacy of a number of these things. So Elizabeth just wants to know what the most effective medical treatments are at this point in time. Is there anything that you can point to and just say, this is almost always successful, or this almost always works? And Janice is wondering what that looks like in relation to bloodletting. Is bloodletting considered to be, something that is very beneficial for certain diseases, or is it something they're just hoping will turn out?
Those are both good questions. All right. So one of the problems when you're talking about efficacy is, did you get the strength right? 18th century, don't have the chemistry to make sure you get the strength right. Did the patient take it as prescribed? Did we get it right? There's cases of adulteration of drugs, 18th century, where companies ship us something that we don't want, and so we end up using the wrong thing sometimes. So there's a lot of variables, but you can look at it in the fact that if you get everything right, you get the diagnosis right, you get the drug right, your patient takes it as prescribed, there's a few things that can actually help treat the cause. So like scurvy, we know that citrus can turn that around. We just can't tell you it's a vitamin C situation. 18th century, we talk about chlorosis, which is a good description for anemia. We call it green vitriol. Today it would be called iron sulfate. So yes, that can possibly help. We have some cinchona tree bark right there for treating what 18th century we call the intermittent fever. It's a good description for malaria. 1820, we figure out what's in it and call it quinine, which can actually help kill the parasite in your blood. And that quinine is actually still used today, although there's other drugs as well. So there's a few things that can actually treat causes. Most of what we've got 18th century from a modern standpoint is better for treating symptoms. And then you get into the fact that, yes, it works. Like the turpentine will work to stop bleeding, but just don't use it, right? So there's modern standards going on.
Awesome.
We're surprised how much that they're using that actually did have an effect.
Cool. So we've talked a lot.
And bloodletting real quick?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay,
Thank you.
Don't want to forget that person that asked about bloodletting. So from a modern standpoint, there are actually a couple rare blood diseases where removing blood can actually help. So examples would be if your patient has too much iron or too many red blood cells, removing blood would be used, although today we call it phlebotomy and give it a more sophisticated term. And then leeches, which the first American case where we're using leeches, we reattached an ear in Boston, 1985. Leeches were used to help relieve congestion in the veins, and they're still around too. So
that's awesome.
All right.
So we've talked a lot about treating things once the problem is present and an issue.
Right.
But obviously it's ideal to just not have a problem in the first place. So Liz was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how we're preventing things, especially looking at things like smallpox. Is there a way to be inoculated or vaccinated? Can you talk about what that means in the 18th century, those terms, and how one can try and be immune to certain things or protect themselves?
All right. Protect yourself would be good. Immunity is not in our vocabulary yet, but we'll get there. So real quick, the difference between inoculation and vaccination, this is how I remember it. So vaccination, think vacca, that's Latin for cow. Vaccination is cowpox. It's a related virus. Inoculation is where you're using matter from an active case of smallpox. So that, from a modern standpoint, would be live virus. And then which comes first? I comes before V in the alphabet. So inoculation comes before vaccination, which is going to be in the 1790s. So if you're living in Williamsburg, we do have a number of outbreaks of smallpox, and you've got to decide, do you want to be inoculated or not? So what our job is to find some patients that have a light case of smallpox. Today we know that there's actually more than one virus or two related viruses that cause it. Find a light case of virus, take that lancet that we were showing you earlier, dip it in the matter. We can give you a scratch, get the matter under the skin. It's actually one method of several. And then we really need you to go into quarantine and be a good patient and stay there, because while you're recuperating and you have all these sores, you are contagious. It's not until the sores have scabbed over and have fallen off that you're not contagious. And there is actually a Virginia Gazette ad in the 1760s saying that some of these people came out of quarantine and their clothes were destroyed because they didn't want the contagion in the clothes to spread. So don't wear anything nice while you're in quarantine, right? You're going to have to say goodbye to it.
I think most of us spent quarantine in sweatpants anyway, so we're still doing that in the 21st
That's
century,
true.
right?
That's true, right.
And I know, going along with that, talking about quarantine, talking about, keeping yourself away from others while you might be contagious, we've just put a link in the chat as well to a blog post about looking at COVID-19 in the 21st century and in the 18th century, how we're dealing with things. So you can also check that post out for some more information, both 18th century and modern, and a comparison between the two. But looking back fully to the 18th century, I have two questions that seem to go hand in hand here. Carmen asks, do you think people were generally healthier due to eating table or farm-to-table foods, despite being in the 18th century? And how common is sugar sickness? And then right on after that, Charlie has asked if chocolate is a treatment for illness.
Oh, chocolate.
So,
thank you, Charlie.
Tell us about that.
All right. So chocolate is actually prescribed as a medicine, 18th century, and it is the only time where we have ever actually made a medicine and tried it. The only time. So using 18th century directions, hot chocolate was ingested. It was prescribed for coughs and to raise the spirits. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yes, all right.
Wholeheartedly.
There is modern research about the chemistry of chocolate that when you get above 70% dark chocolate, there is a correlation with the theobromine in your chocolate that it can help coughs. I say, talk to your pharmacists, but the research is out there. And then the other questions, as I went to my favorite one, which one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Are people just generally healthier if we're using
farm
chocolate
to
without
table?
really much sugar? Are
Yeah.
people getting sugar sicknesses of any sort? Are people healthier because they're eating less sugar, less junk food, eating foods that are closer to them?
Okay, I apologize for that. So if you're talking about diabetes, it is described 18th century, and we don't know about the different types, but we do know that there is sugar in the urine, and one of the treatments is a milk and almond diet, which your modern doctor would say skip, right? But it is diagnosed empirically at the time. And as far as are we healthier 18th century, that's a good question, and there's lots of different ways to go with that, but one thing to consider is that the childhood mortality, 18th century, you think about all the diseases, like in Williamsburg, we know there's whooping cough, there's scarlet fever, there's measles, there's smallpox. These are all things that we're struggling with. So smallpox is kind of the exception when it comes to prevention of a disease. The preventions for these others are coming in the future. So it breaks our heart, 18th century, because the childhood mortality is significant compared to today in America. But if you're living out on a farm, isolated from other people, obviously you're not eating food with a lot of preservatives in it, although we do use salt and smoke to preserve foods at that time. You could probably argue that you're doing pretty well. So different ways to take that question apart, and it deserves more time, and I apologize, we're short.
That was a really great intro to everything you have to look at, though. Thank you. And I think it brings up the good point that, we have to appreciate the 18th century for what it was. They're doing the best with what they have, and they have put a lot of research into what they do. So we have time for one last question, and I'm going to ask one that John has written in. We've kind of touched on it, but I'd just love for you to clarify. How much preventative medicine are we actually seeing in the 18th century? How much are people taking steps to preserve their health versus just treating stuff after they pop up?
Besides smallpox inoculation, knowing that if you can get a light case, you won't get another case. You're completely free from it for the rest of your life. We are taking cinchona bark, and we were talking about the tincture here. We are using it as a preventative for malaria as well as for treatment. And there are some books, Cheney writes in the 1730s about ways to preserve your health. And one of the things he's recommending is cold bathing. And he puts it under the category of exercise. So we think your body's made of fibers because we don't know about cells yet. And so this cold water that you're bathing in should brace you at the time. The other thing is that they do know if somebody is contagious, keep them in quarantine. Don't let them run around. So preventative medicine is not our strength yet, but we're working on it. You will find some examples of people trying to warn others about what they can do to stay healthy.
Awesome. And are these preventative medicines easy to get, or is it a little bit prohibitive based on who you are in society? Can anyone just go?
So the
and get
cinchona
this?
bark is actually, it's coming in from Peru, but like during the American, War for Independence, right? Britain's not shipping us drugs. There's original records of the colonists smuggling it in and going down to the Caribbean, and there's one record of like how many pounds of this is coming in to the Williamsburg area. So you may not have regular shipments, but when we got it, we've got a lot of it. One year, our doctor writes to his drug company in London and says, I have so much, I don't need any more this year. Thanks very much. So that one's not going to be hard. Cold water is pretty easy to get at that time. So depends what you're trying to find.
Well, it's great to see the perspective from the 18th century of people looking after their health and all the different ways they've been treating it. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. So thank you for everyone who sent in your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, for answering them all and telling
Thanks for
us
inviting
about
me.
all of this. And I want to give an especially big thank you to all of you out there listening, watching, who sent in questions, and especially our donors. Without all of you, programs like this one and so many others just wouldn't be possible. And we love getting to do this and share it with you. So thank you all.
Thank you.
We hope that we're going to be able to see you in person in Colonial Williamsburg really soon. Remember, you can visit the Pasteur and Galt Apothecary and talk to Robin in person. But we're very glad in the meantime you joined us here today. Thank you so much and have a good afternoon.
Take care.